Welcome to another episode of Critic.Reading.Writing. My name is Ato Kwesen, and I am a professor of English at Stanford University. This week's episode will be focused on Fiston Mwanza Mujila Tram 83, which won the Etisalat Prize for African Literature in 2016 and the Rosegger Literary Prize in Austria in 2018. Tram 83 revolves around the fraught relationship between Requiem, an all-round hustler with a predilection for the oracular, and Lucien, a down-and-out historian and writer struggling to find his métier. Lucien is dependent on the largesse and support of his erstwhile friend and now reluctant benefactor. The story of the two friends is interwoven between two settings, one more prominently situated in the foreground and repeatedly returned to as the privileged confluence for all the major characters, that is, the Tram 83 of the title, and the other is the political and social setting of the city-state. The city-state is a misshapen republic that has broken away from the equally allegorically named back country. Both are barely concealed references to the Democratic Republic of Congo, the city-state being the province of Katanga, famous for the rich deposits of minerals, including diamonds and cobalt, and the backcountry being the rest of the DRC. The designation of the city-state is highly suggestive, as it points to the fact that it is neither a fully-fledged city nor is it an operational nation-state. Rather, its in-between status allows Mujila to paint an unsettling picture of brutal political self-interest placed at the mercy of a marauding capitalism. We will see how Mujila deploys the chronotopes of the bar to situate an entirely different form of political allegory through features of carnivalesque exuberance. Capitalism in the novel is firmly tied to the resource extraction and is depicted in the novel by the many international tourists that mill about the place and always end up at the tram. The name tourist is itself an ironical play on a commonly used designation of leisure and discovery, for the many transnational tourists of Tram 83 are no sightseers, but rather are intent on expropriating heterogenite, the word coined in the novel as a stand-in for the numerous minerals that the province has been known for in the course of its turbulent history. As we are told, the region was so rich in deposits that a legend had grown up, and it happens to be true, recounting how the inhabitants of the city-state dug up their gardens, their houses, their living room, their bathrooms, their bedrooms, and even the cemetery. Yes, in the cemetery, funerals would sometimes turn festive following chance discovery of a high-grade stone. 1885 is frequently referred to in the novel as the year in which the tourists began to arrive in this veritable El Dorado. But those familiar with the history of the region will recognize it as a signal of the start of Belgium's colonial regime of the Congo following the 1884-85 Berlin Conference, when 13 European countries and the United States met to settle the rules for Africa's colonization, as we saw in our episode on the Heart of Darkness. The precarious political status of the city-state in relation to the backcountry also means that as their self-appointed messiah, the city-state's dissident general is emboldened to pass numerous edicts aiming to fortify his political independence and, more pointedly, to generate wealth for lining up his own pockets. The citizens of the city-state, the tourists, and everyone else are in permanent thrall to his every whim and caprice. The foreground and background settings of the tram and the city-state provide two different yet interlinked dimensions for interpreting the novel. The fact that the city-state spells political oppression, obscene consumption, the free reign of greedy transnational capitalist interest, and decrepit social conditions for the many encourages that we read the novel at least in part as a political allegory reminiscent of some of the work of Aikwe Ama, Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, Soni Labutansi, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, among the many other African writers that have turned to the subject of politics in Africa in their novels. As setting, the tram, on the other hand, is a cross between a nightclub, a circus, and a theater of dreams. As we are pointedly told on the very first page, indeed, an air of connivance hung ever about the place. This air of connivance turns out not to be an idle metaphor, for whenever we are ushered into Tram 83, we eavesdrop on various deals in the making, some with potentially sinister consequences, as we later come to find out. The various deals include the Swiss tourist Malingeau's proposition to Lucien for him to scale down the number of characters in his script in progress so he can get him published. Requiem's incessant interventions to either prevent the book deal from happening or, if it does, for him to exclusively profit from it. Or, as we see repeatedly throughout the novel, the baby chicks, single mamas, and bus girls' attempts at attracting the club's male clients. As we shall see in a moment, the female sex workers' repeated attempts at getting the attention of clients in Tram 83 and the psalms that they reel out as part of their seductive repertoires provide reiterated refrains that establish an unusual rhythmic quality to the narrative in the novel. There are many ways in which Tram 83 is likely to be read, but I want to surmise that all of them will have to involve some reference to music. Jazz and other kinds of music infuse the nightclub without fail. Each time we are ushered into Tram 83, we have the benefit of a band playing and are given elaborate descriptions of the provenance of the band's men. They come from various parts of the world, including South America. The sources of their music, a medley of jazz, salsa, Zairian-infused rumba, and several other music types. Their playing styles, good, bad, plain, mournful, and even of the clothes they wear. We are also regularly shown the club's audience's responses to the various bands ranging from indifference through excited approbation to menacing hostility. But the musicality that we see at the level of content is also superbly augmented by rhythms at the level of narration. And it is here that the experimental innovativeness of Mujila's narrative style is likely to be recognized. The rhythmic character of the narration is systematically structured around a series of repeated sentences, phrases, and sequences in a sometimes humorous but often dissonant distributional matrix. These provide the novel not only with the air of an improvisational jazz symphony, but perhaps even more importantly, lend it a dramatic character, as if it was written to be visualized rather than just read, or for the stage and screen rather than just for the inert pages of the book we hold in our hands. There's even something danceable about it. By far the most reiterated sentences in the novel are, "Do you have the time?" and different variants of "foreplay is like democracy." The innocuous request for the time turns out to be the first gambit in a sex worker's arsenal of approaches to a potential client. We first hear it uttered by a baby chick keen on hooking up with Requiem at the train station where he's waiting for Lucien's arrival at the start of the novel. Significantly, "Do you have the time?" "Foreplay is like democracy," and various other sentences and sentence fragments are subsequently repeated, but not only from the mouths of identifiable sex workers at the nightclub and elsewhere, but also in the form of disembodied interruptions that float in and out of the narrative at random, as if unmoored and out of nowhere. The reiterated sentences from the sex workers become not the mere projections from a background onto the scenes of address, be this a dialogue between two characters or a segment of contextualization or description lying strictly between the third person narrator and the reader, but rather serve to redefine the very grounds upon which the scenes of address gain shape in the primary instance. The girls are Shakara girls, in the terms that Fela Ransom Kuti made famous in his song Shakara Olu Oje, which itself became an ubiquitous urban anthem in many parts of Africa in the 1970s and 1980s. While the reiterated questions, statements, and fragments enact the performative incremental repetitions most commonly found in poetry, they must ultimately be understood as establishing a dialectical relationship between the concerns for female survival that they express and the cynical masculine discourses of profit and competition that occupy the foreground at all times. Thus, the reiterated statements are not to be parenthesized as we read, but must be accounted for as a form of strategic obliteration of background, for the women in the novel are to be taken as seriously as the men, even if on first viewing they seem to deliver nothing but the guarantee of hedonistic largesse and munificence. There are two other reiterated elements that also contribute to the rhythmic sense that we get from the narration. One is to be found in the subtle relationship established in the novel between ensembles and solos, or in another register, a chorus function and that of individual performativity. This particular feature is itself amenable to a musical interpretation, such as in the examples of scene setting at the beginning of chapter 14. Psalm 83, interior. In the background, a saxophonist performing a solo. Center forward, the young ladies of Avignon in their vestal robes eyeing up all the masculine clients. Left back, the Chinese tourists. Front door, the bus girls with fat lips and her colonial infantry partner. Or, in a more pointed operatic mode, the reaction, predominantly skeptical, to Malingeau's first introduction of Lucien to the regulars of Tram 83 as a historian. Dear friends, you are not going to believe me. This man you see is a historian. General hilarity. The whole tram as one. Didn't you give a shit or what? Then, as a scattered choir, and you earn a living doing history? Look what can happen by dint of imitating the tourists. You study girls too, or just history. You are an embarrassment to us with your wallowing in art history. I'll throw myself onto the tracks if Dad insists I study history and stuff, exclaimed a kid barely 10 years old who was with his father. And about 20 pages later, a reprise, but this time as Lucien attempts a public reading of his manuscript, suggestively titled, by the way, The Africa of Possibility, Lumumba, The Fall of an Angel, or The Pestle Mortar Years. He extracted his text from a portfolio. He took a serious stance. He opened the ball after having requested a minute's silence in memory of the victims of a recent mine cave-in. He was trembling like a dead leaf. He emphasized the words, raised his voice. He had counted on the audience trying to trip him up. 1 minute too many, one sentence out of place, and he'd find out what they were made of, which wasn't long in happening as the imprecations began to rend the heavens. The whole tram as one. Get off, Lucien! Then a scattered choir. Don't preach at us. You are hot. I want you. Alligator, show off. One can almost hear the dissonant a cappella captured in these scenes. The entire novel can be read along the lines of an opera or ballet, for almost all the conversations that take place are set against the distribution of characters within the scenes in a variety of clusters that establish different relations of proximity and distance to the events that unfold. Mujila's consistent infusion of music into his narrative calls to mind most strongly Wolo Soyinka's own deployment of drumming throughout the action of Death and the King's Horseman, as we saw in the episode on the play. Soyinka's play has a highly elaborate sonic and poetic dimension that is easy to miss when reading it merely as a playtext. But whereas Soyinka's sonic infusions provide a means of modulating the actions of his play, in the case of Tram 83, the musical dimension is a means of suggesting an orchestration, as if Mujila is the conductor of the improvisational jazz symphony I mentioned earlier. This dimension of orchestration, and not just of the presence of the music at the level of content, seems to me to be distinctive in African, if not world literature. The third and final reiterated feature we should note is the device of lengthy itemization that punctuates the narrative at irregular intervals. The list of the variety of people that come to the tram early on in the novel provides a good instance, but is by no means the only one. To gauge its effect, we're obliged to quote the passage in full. Inadvertent musicians, and elderly prostitutes, and prestidigitators, and Pentecostal preachers, and students resembling mechanics, and doctors conducting diagnosis in nightclubs, and young journalists already retired, and transvestites, and second foot shoe peddlers, and porn film fans, and highwaymen, and pimps, and disbarred lawyers, and casual laborers, and former transsexuals, and polka dancers, and pirates of the high seas, and seekers of political asylum, and organized fraudsters, and archaeologists, and would be bounty hunters, and modern day adventurers and explorers searching for a lost civilization, and human organ dealers, and farmyard philosophers, and hawkers of fresh water, and hairdressers, and shoeshine boys, and repairers of spare parts, and soldiers' widows, and sex maniacs, and lovers of romance novels, and dissident rebels, and brothers in Christ, and druids, and shamans, and aphrodisiac vendors, and scriveners, and purveyors of real fake passports, and gun runners, and porters, and bric-a-brac traders, and growth hormone merchants. All sorts of tribes overran Tram 83 in search of good times on the cheap. To catch the effectiveness of this list, one must read it out loud without pausing even to laugh at its patent absurdism. The haphazard assemblages encapsulated in the lengthy lists are also the sign of a quest for community coupled to its automatic negation, a quest firmly tied to its very conditions of impossibility. The reason for this intractable coupling is fairly straightforward, namely that in the Hobbesian universe of the city state, everything is exclusively reduced to the two primary impulses of sex and money, money and sex, or sex as money as sex. Even though everything in the city state points to political corruption, the decrepitude of the social environment, blackouts, for example, are commonplace in the novel, and the social hierarchies generated by the relentless pursuit of the famed heterogenite, the characters in Tram 83 are far from sad or miserable. They are most definitely not defeated. This provides a stark contrast to any other African work that depicts a similar set of dastardly conditions. Take, for example, Alain Mabanko's extraordinarily hilarious Broken Glass, which we might note to be one of the direct inspirations for Tram 83. Mabanko pens the preface to Mujila's novel and has high praise for it. Broken Glass stands on the eponymous hero's valiant attempt to write down the history of credit gone west, the drinking bar of which he is the constant and invariant occupant. There is much that is funny in Broken Glass, but also much that is sad. Tram 83 is different because despite the fact that there is much in the characters' social surroundings that should make them miserable, most of them seem to be exuberant rather than morose and despondent. They want to live, period. This desire to live rather than merely to exist may also serve to explain what is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the novel, namely the representation of women. In Tram 83, we find a gallery of female characters, all of whose roles are tied to sex work, the aforementioned baby chicks, single mamas, and bus girls, and all of whom, while categorized according to their ages and the youthfulness of their bodies, share the common pursuit of sex for money. And yet, what might appear on first reading as a wet dream for men turns out on closer inspection to be something quite different. For, as we are told, the woman managed the whole shebang from Genesis to the letter to the Corinthians. Put your leg like this. Place your right hand on my belly. Ride me like I were your horse. Stroke my curves. Back forward. Back forward slowly. Stop. Now start stroking my hair. In other words, the woman regulates the manner in which they are to be dealt with. Far from being victims of male desire, they express a vitality that can even outstrip the desires of the men. Everyone knows exactly what they are getting when they agree to enter into a sexual relationship. The operative word is agreement. For Mujila's novel, sex is completely discombobulated. It becomes first and last a transaction in which the women have utter control on how sex is going to be conducted. More importantly, the designs of the various sex workers we find in the novel provides the most trenchant critique of the atrophying of the socio-economic relations that the ruthless system of extraction which rules the city-state has produced. As the epigraph to the novel states quite boldly, you will eat by the sweat of your breasts. The switch from brow to breasts is a mark of the atrophying of the labor relation, where men and women are obliged to survive strictly from the sweat of their labor. Indeed, the epigraph speaks directly to the inversion of the words of the Psalms. When you shall eat of the fruit of your hands, you will be happy, and it will be well with you, which is Psalm 128, verse 2. This literally suggests that in the environment of wanton extraction that dominates the novel, a woman must control her only means of production. This does not mean that there is no cost, but the cost of illness and sexually transmitted diseases is equally borne by both men and women. In the universe of corruption, that is the city state, no one is spared. The upshot of all the reiterated dimensions of Tram 83 we have noted is that the novel has the appearance of the putting together of jazz variations, as though it was a symphony of different instruments in a sometimes playful and sometimes painful series of conversations, at once picking up on the notes from each other, but also contradicting and contesting what has been offered. In this way, Tram 83 converts the jazz variations we see in the novel into a mode of critique of the African post-colony. For the post-colony is seen as an incoherent assemblage, a space of possibilities and also chaos, and finally, one that can only be understood from the carnivalesque perspective of humor that is tinged with the clear-sightedness of wry critique. Thank you very much. Please remember to check the suggested readings in the episode description. And if you like this episode, give a thumbs up, subscribe and share, hit the notifications bell so that you do not miss out on any upcoming episodes, and enter your comments in the section below. See you next week.